Hi, and thanks for joining us at the Wine Country Real Estate YouTube channel. And today, I am going to share with you 5 negotiating strategies that you can use when buying or selling a home. These are not the only strategies I use, but they're probably the most effective and they're the simplest. So I'm going to go ahead and share them with you today, starting with number 1. Tactic number 1 is bottom lining, which is the quickest and easiest way for a home buyer and a home seller to come to a mutual understanding and get their deal into escrow. Often a seller will communicate to potential buyers all the terms and conditions that they want in the sale of their home. And when a buyer says, well, I'm willing to accept all those terms and conditions, but I want a different price, well, the terms and conditions are locked in and now we're negotiating just the bottom line. This can go very quickly and between counteroffer and counteroffer until they arrive at a mutually agreeable price. And that price, as long as it is more than the minimum that the seller is willing to accept and below the maximum that a buyer is willing to pay, boom, you're into escrow. Tactic 2 is using comparable market data to support your asking price if you're a seller or your offer price if you're a buyer. Often after the terms and conditions have been kind of worked out and the two parties are trying to come together on price, one of the things that you can do as either buyer or seller is to bring out onto the table comparable market data that supports your position. Comparable market data are recent sales in the neighborhood of similar properties with adjustments for any differences between the home that we're negotiating and others that have sold in the area. And quite often it becomes a situation where the seller will bring out certain transactions and base their asking price on those transactions, and the buyer will come in with either those same transactions or other transactions that better support their position, and the two get to negotiate back and forth. If you have a good negotiating skills and you're supported by comparable market data, you're more likely to get the needle moved over towards the price that you're willing to either pay or accept. Comparable market data is very important for buyers because when the property goes into escrow, if the buyer is getting a mortgage, the mortgage company is of course going to send out an appraiser to appraise the property, and that appraiser will most likely use the same comparable market data or results of recent sales and current listings to establish the market value of that home. That could affect the terms of the mortgage. So the buyer wants to make sure that they are not paying more than what the appraiser is saying the property is going to be worth. Tactic number 3 is swapping terms for price. And here's a couple examples. Let's say a buyer and seller go into escrow and everything's going fine, but in the first couple days after they get into escrow, the seller gets a phone call and finds out that the home that he was buying, where he intended to move after his home is sold, is fallen out of escrow, and now he has to go out looking again to find a home to move into. So he goes back to the buyer and he says, well, we had a 30-day escrow. I need more time to find another home to go to. So can we extend escrow from 30 to 60 days? Many buyers will say, well, yeah, I can do that, but I want an adjustment or a consideration to the price. I'll do it for $5,000. Well, an amendment is written up, both parties sign, and we go from a 30 to a 60-day escrow, and $5,000 is taken off the purchase price. Those actually happen more often than many people think. A second example would be kind of the same situation. We go into escrow 30 days, and the same thing happens. The seller finds out he can't close escrow on the home that he intended to go to, so now he needs some more time to go out and find one. But instead of coming back and saying, well, I want a 60-day escrow, he comes back and he says, well, I want a 30-day escrow, but I want to be able to have a 60-day lease back after sale. And that becomes a negotiating point too. Our buyer can say, well, I'm willing to lease it back to you. They look at what the market rents are in the area, might even add a little bit for a convenience fee, and the buyer will come back and say, sure, let's close escrow in 30 days. I'll give you a 60-day rent back, but instead of you paying rent, what I really want is, let's say it's $5,000 a month rent. Instead of that $10,000 for 2 months, I just want to take $10,000 off the sale price. So that's one way to trade terms, again, for a lower price. Tactic number 4, seller concessions. Seller concessions usually don't change the actual sale price, but they can affect how much buyer and seller pay in closing costs. Let's say in our example transaction that buyer and seller have agreed to split certain closing costs 50-50. Well, during the escrow period, as it gets started, buyer is doing his inspections, but he's starting to get cold feet and he's thinking about pulling out of the deal. Seller really doesn't want the buyer to pull out, so he says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you something to keep you in the deal. My incentive is going to be a $10,000 closing cost credit, which is a seller concession. And that means that the buyer is going to pay $10,000 less in closing costs, and the seller is going to cover that $10,000 in his closing costs. Now, another example is repairs. Let's say during this inspection period, the buyer found an item that needs to be repaired that the seller didn't even know about. They bring in a contractor. Contractor says, yeah, I want $5,000 to fix it, but my schedule's really backed up. I can't be here until a week after escrow is scheduled to close. Well, rather than delaying closing, buyer and seller agree that seller will provide another seller concession targeted towards repairs of $5,000 that goes, again, $5,000 added to what the seller is going to pay, and it's $5,000 less that the buyer is going to pay in those split closing costs. And the final one that we see quite a bit is interest rate buy down. And again, the seller is looking for an incentive to keep this buyer into the deal. It says, I'll tell you what, to sweeten the deal, I will buy down your mortgage interest rate. And if you're not familiar with how that works, just in short, a mortgage company will say, yeah, we'll give you this interest rate, but if you give us a big lump sum interest payment, we'll lower that interest rate. And that's what we're talking about here. The seller says, okay, I will pick up another, say, $10,000 in closing costs. Your closing cost allocation is reduced $10,000. Now you have additional $10,000 that you can use to buy down your mortgage interest rate. And that may or may not happen through escrow or from the buyer to the mortgage company, but it is another credit that goes on the closing statement where the seller pays $10,000 more and the buyer pays $10,000 less. Tactic number 5 is my favorite, nickel and diming. Now, this is a labor-intensive process, and it's best used when the parties are pretty close on price, but you just want to nudge that price in the direction that's favorable to you, and so you're willing to put in the work. So here's some examples if you're a seller and you want to nickel and dime your buyer. You can offer things such as garden tools, pool cleaning equipment, items that are considered personal property that do not convey, and it has been disclosed that these items are not included in the sale. Well, you can be willing to add them for a slight adjustment in price. Other things that you might be able to offer would be, let's say, appliances such as a washer and dryer, refrigerator, stove, things like that. Anything that can be with one wrench and a couple guys with a dolly could be moved out. They have been specifically disclosed that they are not included in the sale. Well, again, you can now say, well, I'll throw those in for another X number of dollar price adjustment. So another thing is prepaid services. Let's say you got a big estate home and you've got a gardener, you got a pool cleaner. A seller can say, I'll tell you what, if you use my guy, I'll pay him for 6 months. They will come and they will clean your pool, they'll mow your lawn, trim your hedges for the next 5 months on me. I'll pay them up front. And another one that's kind of similar is extended warranty on either products or a home warranty. And the home warranty usually covers major systems. They are pretty common that they are included in home sales, but you want to say up front that you're not offering a home warranty, but then you can add it later in your nickel and diming and say, I'm going to throw in a home warranty that's worth so much, I want just a little teeny price adjustment. If you're a buyer and you want to offer some nickel and dime items to get a price adjustment, here's the 3 most common things that we often see. Number 1 is to offer to pay for the seller's moving costs. You want to make sure that you cap that at a maximum so that you don't end up paying for more than you're willing or can afford to pay. Second thing is storage, and you want to find out how much storage you're going to need, and if they're going to be storing locally where the rates should be so much, or if they're going to be storing their things 2 states away near where they intend to live after they leave, and you want to find out what those rates are there so that you make a reasonable offer. The final thing that we often try to use if we're working with a client who's buying an as-is house that needs some work, or if it's a flip, is trash out or junk removal. And this can actually be self-serving for the buyer, because if you're buying a house that's as is, the seller isn't going to remove a lot of junk. They might not cut out or cut down a lot of the weeds in the backyard. But if you make an offer, hey, I'll pay up to $5,000 for junk out, as an incentive, that might be a way of actually not only helping them to get rid of things that they want to get rid of, because they can throw a lot of their stuff on the junk pile, but also it gets rid of things that you don't want to have to deal with as a buyer when you move in. When you're doing your nickel and dime haggling, keep a few things in mind. Be very careful not to bring anything into the nickel and dime haggling that's already included in the deal because it was not properly disclosed that it wasn't, such as personal property, appliances, all that type of thing. Make sure that up front you disclose that they're not already part of the deal and free to use in your nickel and dime haggling. Next thing is you want to make sure that any agreements that are made during that haggling are documented in writing, signed by both parties, and sent on to escrow as an amendment or addendum to the purchase contract. The other thing, if you're a real estate agent, is make sure that the manner in which you do your haggling is in line with your broker's typical best practices and procedures. Make sure that you're not doing anything that your broker frowns upon. That's very important. So those are 5 of the many tactics that can be used to negotiate a home or land purchase, any kind of actual real estate purchase. If you have any comments, questions, please leave them. I hope you'll like, subscribe, and join us again on Wine Country Real Estate. Take care.